Welcome to Journey to the Sunnyside, the podcast where we have thoughtful conversations to explore the science of habits, uncover the secrets to mindful living, and of course, inspire your own mindful drinking journey. This podcast is brought to you by Sunnyside, the #1 alcohol moderation platform. And if you could benefit from drinking a bit less, head on over to sunnyside.co to get a free 15-day trial. I'm your host, Mike Hardenbrook, published author, neuroscience enthusiast, and habit change expert. Hey, and welcome back to Journey to the Sunnyside. I'm Mike Hardenbrook, and let me start by asking you something. Let's say you're a guy who drinks a six-pack while you're watching the game. Would you call that binge drinking? Now, most of us wouldn't, but that's actually the threshold, or even beyond it, when it comes to binge drinking. So in today's episode, it isn't about guilt or judgment. It's more about bringing awareness. And I especially wanted to do this in April because this is Alcohol Awareness Month. And because when you understand the different levels of drinking, now with that awareness, you can start making better choices that line up with what you really want. So in this episode, I'm going to break down each of these categories. So first, what's considered moderate drinking? And let's start with the baseline. So the CDC or the NIAAA define moderate drinking as up to 1 drink per day for a woman or up to 2 drinks per day for a man. And so for the clarity of this, 1 drink is, for example, for wine, 5 ounces of wine. For beer, it's a 12-ounce beer. It's not the big giant beer. That's not just one beer. Or 1.5 ounces of liquor, which is most of us know as a shot. So that means in a standard bottle of wine, it contains about 5 drinks or 5 glasses of wine. And actually, that surprised me because in doing this research, I always thought it was 4, to be honest. So if you already knew that, you're ahead of the game. But I think a lot of people are like, okay, that's actually more than I thought. And that's really the point of this episode. This isn't about shaming our behavior or saying that we're drinking excessively. It's about knowing the numbers that we don't actually usually talk about. Now, the next one is, what is binge drinking? So this also surprised me the first time. I didn't just learn it now. However, when I did hear it, I was like, that's binge drinking? So here's where it gets more surprising. So according to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, binge drinking is defined as the following: 4 or more drinks for a woman, 5 or more drinks for a man, consumed within a 2-hour period. So I think this is why it gets so surprising. So let's say a woman is having dinner with friends, has 2 glasses of wine while they're cooking, getting ready. They have a glass of wine with dinner, and then maybe afterwards have another glass of wine. It doesn't sound extreme. It's not like you think of binge drinking kind of like in college kids, just, slamming drinks. But honestly, in that example I just gave you, by definition, is in the category of binge drinking. And, on the flip side of a guy who has 3 beers at a cookout or is barbecuing, that has a couple more over the next couple hours, same kind of thing. It's pretty normal for a guy just to walk in, grab a 6-pack and say, I'm going to have a 6-pack tonight. But that's in that same category. And again, this doesn't mean that it's necessarily anything that people are doing wrong or going crazy. But what it does mean is that your body is processing alcohol differently at that point, and the risk for poor sleep, higher blood pressure, decision fatigue, and then, of course, long-term effects start to mount up and climb. So bringing this awareness that we're talking about here. And then the third category, which is a more newly categorized, or at least category that has been brought into the press recently, is called high-intensity drinking. So let's take this a step further from binge drinking, because to be honest, when I looked at the binge drinking, I found out from my past, to be honest, and I said, four drinks for a woman, 5 drinks for a man is considered binge drinking. I'd be like, that was a Tuesday for me. So, I was surprised to hear that, of course. And so now we have this other category, and high intensity drinking is more of a newer term that researchers are using to describe heavier, less frequent, but more intense episodes. And so for a woman, that means 8 drinks in a session. For a man, it means 10 drinks. And of course, this is probably more in the category that I thought binge drinking was. And this is all in a single session. And this happens, in places that we would expect. Big events, weddings, vacations, birthdays, holiday parties. Now, that's the more norm, but also just a regular night out, many people probably can relate and say, I've had close to or even at that number just on a regular Friday night, getting into the moment. Now, do realize that I'm telling you from my personal experience, I'm from people that I know, both myself working with people and also my own personal history, that, yeah, that also did happen. Not a ton, but this really kind of gets us into more of a danger zone of the usual things that we've already been taught about alcohol. When you overdo it, you're susceptible to blacking out and risky behavior and getting into accidents and making really poor choices. However, also, some studies show that high intensity drinking doesn't just raise our short-term risks for harm, they're also linked to a higher chance of developing AUD over time, even if it only happens a couple times a month. So those are the studies. Now let's go a little bit further into this term that might be the first time that you're hearing it, and that is around like who's engaging in high intensity drinking. And we always assume, hey, young kids in their college, that's how we were in college, that would be pretty normal. However, you've probably read some of the headlines, and if you haven't, but according to Monitoring the Future and some recent data from the National Alcohol Survey, high intensity drinking rates have declined among college age adults, but they're increasing when it comes to adults aged 35 to 60. And in 2024, a study found that nearly 1 in 8 adults in that age category reported drinking 10 or more drinks in a night on a regular basis. So what's going on with that? Young people, of course, they drink to socialize and feel confident, part of rite of passage. However, middle-aged adults, they're reporting to drinking at these levels to cope with stress, with burnout, grief, maybe parenting, work pressure, all the different kinds of reasons that many of us probably know all too well. However, also, many of us also know that 2020, the pandemic changed a lot of these patterns. Drinking became more of a release valve and a reward system. It was more normalized, and a lot of times put in these comical ways for us to laugh about how much we're drinking or that we're allowed to drinking. But for some of these bad habits, they ended up sticking around. So now let's keep going further on what this means, because the science tells us that even occasional high intensity drinking sessions, especially for those who are middle-aged, it is linked to increased risk of heart arrhythmias and stroke, higher rates of cognitive decline and memory issues, suppressed immune function, and significantly, as we know, worse sleep, worse anxiety, and recovery. And you probably felt that, maybe the Sunday dread, the crappy sleep, and emotional hangover, all that feeling being out of sync with yourself. And this isn't just about what happens during the night. We also know about what we lose the days following. All right, so how do we use this information moving forward? And as you know, we're not here to say you can't drink forever. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, that's never going to happen. None of those categories you're ever going to drop into except for the perfect moderate one or the abstinence one. No, we're not perfect. It's very possible that any of those things could happen. However, what we are saying is that when you know these categories, you can start making more conscious choices. It helps you to see when a pattern is likely to happen, when maybe you were going to drink more than you planned, and what categories and risks that puts you in. So like regularly drinking 5 drinks in a sitting, that might be working against your goals for your health, your energy, and your mood. So when you know that, you can still enjoy your night, but maybe you're going to be more intentional around where you're going to put that limit. So I'm going to end it with my normal challenge or reflection. Today is going to be a reflection. I want you to ask yourself, when I drink more than, let's say, 4 to 5 drinks in a night, how do I feel the next day? And how often am I crossing that line without realizing it? And if I'm working hard to feel better overall, does this habit support it? And here's the bigger question. If I really want to protect my long-term health, what kind of drinking supports that goal? Because at the end of the day, this isn't about what you're doing that's right. It's about what you're doing that's right for you. And that might mean setting a new limit, or spacing out your drinks, or skipping that last drink, or maybe choosing a non-alcoholic option for one more night than usual. Remember, awareness creates options, and that's where the change begins, not with willpower, but with clarity. And remember, with information, with keeping to your goals, to your why, and believing in yourself, you got this. I know you do. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week and weekend. And until I see you next Monday, cheers to your mindful drinking journey. This podcast is brought to you by Sunnyside, the #1 alcohol moderation platform. And if you could benefit from drinking a bit less, head on over to sunnyside.co to get a free 15-day trial.